Hello viewers, welcome once again to our ongoing series of Mendelism and beyond. To continue our discussion into the second part of epistatic interactions, if you recapitulate what we had discussed in our first episode of epistatic interactions was how do the epistatic genes act, whether they are in a recessive condition or in a dominant condition. The least common factor that they enjoy is that they are examples of non-allelic interactions. And when this is so, how can one expect the ratios that were prophesied by Gregor Johann Mendel? There has to be definitely deviations from these expected ratios. So, continuing with our discussion today, let us see some other type of interactions and some interesting examples, and of course the mathematical and the biochemical implications thereof. As I said earlier, there are so many of the expressions in the form of duplicate recessive epistasis, the normal recessive epistasis that we had discussed at length, which had a ratio of 9:3:4, and you remember there were only three types of phenotypes. And then we had discussed also the interaction of having a novel phenotype with 9:6:1. Again, three types of phenotypic classes. We had also discussed right in the beginning as to, in case of chickens for example, we could have a situation of 9:3:3:1 simply as a modification, but then the number of phenotypic classes were different. So, continuing our discussion, let us today talk about the dominant epistasis first. But prior to that, it would be my duty to again recapitulate the age-old abbreviated phenotypic ratio, because that is always going to help us in classifying the types of phenotypes and the type of interactions in case we are resorting to solving certain numericals on genic interactions. So, to repeat, if you can see on your screens, the abbreviated ratio again is of capital A anything and capital B anything. That means it could be homozygous or heterozygous, 9 combinations, and 3 for capital A and small b combinations. Here B would be in a homozygous recessive condition, and again 3 more for A in a homozygous recessive condition, and B of course would be homo or heterozygous, and just 1 out of 16 combinations would have a double homozygous. So, now when we are talking about dominant epistasis, this is again a very interesting aspect. You would find that in some cases we will have a dominant allele playing the role, and this is going to mask the phenotypic character and the phenotype of the second locus. Now, it had no business to interfere with the second locus, but since this is an interallelic interaction, it happens. So, that means in this case, how can you expect a normal 9:3:1 segregation ratio? It's got to be again a deviation, and in this case, in case of dominant epistasis, we would have 3 phenotypic classes where we will find that wherever capital A is present, this class will be combined with the other genotypic classes. So, there is some sort of a masking effect or gene locus masking. So, that means if we take an example of a capital allele A, now this is going to produce a certain phenotype regardless of whatever be the allelic condition of the other locus. In other words, to put it very simply, capital A locus is going to prevail in all these circumstances, whatever be the situation of the B locus. So in that case, we would say that A locus is epistatic to the B locus. So in this case, how would A express? A would always express itself, whether B is present or not. By B, I mean capital B or small b. So that means the question now arises that when would B show itself? Capital B would show, since it is hypostatic, capital B would show itself only in the absence of capital A. So then let's see how different types of combinations would be formed. So in other words, if you have A and B in the abbreviated ratios capital, or you have A and anything, it would produce the same phenotype. And only the situation would be when you have small a and capital B and something, they will produce two additional phenotypes, one of this and the other, when both of them, that means double homozygous recessive, that is small a and small b. So that means we have again in a nutshell three types of phenotypic classes. Instead of the conventional expected 9-3-3-1, we would have 12:3:1. Let us see on your screens some of the best known examples of this dominant epistasis. We talk about the fruit color in summer squashes. Do you remember, viewers? On our last turn, we had talked about the shape of summer squashes, where we had talked about again the origin of three phenotypic classes and the emergence of a novel phenotype with a ratio of 9:6:1. Here the situation is different. We are talking about the color of fruit in summer squash, that is Cucurbita pepo. Now the locus B alleles, they are producing yellow if it is in a dominant condition, and the small b would be responsible for green. So far so good, but then there is another allele which is a dominant one, which is A. Now this is present on a different chromosome, and this is going to see to it that no color is produced. In other words, it is going to stop the synthesis of any pigment, and in this case we would find that the fruit would remain white. So as far as the interaction is concerned, dominant A allele happens to be epistatic to both capital B as well as small b. So how do we interpret this whole idea? We say that perhaps A is a blocking gene and it is going to stop the pigment synthesis, and it is not going to allow either yellow or green pigments to be produced. So in that case, wherever capital A would be there, there is no question of any color emerging, either yellow or green. That particular fruit would invariably be white. And if you see on the screens a checkerboard, if we can summarize, and then we will analyze the whole thing mathematically and biochemically, it's very apparent that within the gambit of 16 combinations, we have 13 of them which have at least one or two of capital A, and therefore they are bound to be white. There are only three remaining combinations which have small a but then a capital B in a homozygous or in a heterozygous condition, and just one, and so there happens to be yellow, and there is just one which is a double homozygous recessive, giving rise to a green color. How do we interpret the whole idea in terms of a cross? We change the symbols, and we have now talking about the W being the dominant epistatic gene and Y for yellow. So that means in the F1 generation, we find that all the progeny out of a cross of two white fruit individuals or the parents would give rise to all white progeny in F1. In F2, again the abbreviated ratio, we can talk in terms of Punnett square checkerboard, which would again give a replica of what we studied earlier as 13 being white, 3 being yellow and just 1 being green, giving us a ratio of 13, the 12 and 3 and 1. So, how do we biochemically interpret the whole idea? And that's a very interesting aspect, because how these genes are going to function. See, we have to begin with a white colored fruit. This white colored fruit requires, it already has a compound A, which needs to be converted to a compound B. When capital W is present, then there is an inhibition of the synthesis of this enzyme and there will be no conversion. When would this conversion occur? Only when the genotype has 2 small w's, that means recessive homozygous. So, that means in the presence of capital W, color cannot be produced. On the other hand, ironically, there is a gene capital Y, which is responsible for the synthesis of an enzyme which has the capability to change the green color into yellow one. That means the synthesis of the yellow pigment. But on the contrary, if the genotype becomes small yellow, that means homozygous recessive, then again this enzyme is inhibited. So, that means we have to find out the right combination as to when the fruits would be yellow. They will only be yellow when you have W and Y. If capital W is there, then no enzyme 1 is going to be produced, and it's a matter of common sense that unless you have the enzyme 1, how would the enzyme 2 be active at all, because first a green color has to come and then only the yellow coloration, it cannot be direct. And therefore, the genotype small w, small y will produce only enzyme 1, but then there will be no enzyme 2, and therefore, again it will only stop at green color, but not the yellow one. So, the only case where we find that both the enzymes are going to be active when W should be in a recessive homozygous condition and there should be at least one Y. In other words, there should not be any capital W at all. So, on your screens you can see now this abbreviated ratio of the discussion that we had just undertaken, where you would find that white squashes would be produced only when there is a minimum of 1 W capital. Likewise, we have 9 and 3 on the upper side, and the yellow would be only when the W's are small and there is a capital Y at least 1 minimum, and the only possibility of having a green colored squash would be that if you have all the recessive ones. So, this is how the situation goes to prove that the capital W is epistatic to Y and the small y. Why we are stressing on this again and again is that just one copy. I never said that 2 capital W's are important. So, it is just one copy of the pigment which is sufficient to bring about dominant epistasis. And if we make a quick comparison with what we studied on the last turn, you remember whether we were talking about the coat color of mice or we were talking about the retriever labradors, and the detailed discussion of Bombay phenotype that we had, which needed 2 small H factors for the functioning of the agglutinogens. All of them would require in recessive epistasis 2 copies. So, this is the basic comparison between dominant and recessive epistasis, that in dominant epistasis we require just 1 copy, and that is sufficient to bring about epistasis. In case of recessive epistasis, you have to have a homozygous recessive condition. Let us go on to another example, a very interesting one of foxglove, that is the digitalis species which belongs to the family Plantaginaceae. Now here we have given the aspects of a small d allele, which is for light red flowers, say to the tune of pinkish, and the capital LLD is for dark color flowers. And if you have a small w, then the pigment is distributed throughout the flower in a diffused manner. But then if there is a allele capital W, it will be confining the pigments to just the spots, and in a nutshell this type of plant would have white flowers. So without even looking at the checkerboard, one can reach a conclusion with the help of those the handy abbreviated phenotypic ratios. One capital W and one capital D minimum would give 9 white. One capital W, doesn't matter what the other D is, again it would be white, and so that means 9 plus 3 12, and just one capital D with no capital W would amount to red or dark red coloration, that is of anthocyanin synthesis, and just one situation out of 16 where the throughout it is double homozygous recessive, that we have the pink coloration. We could even explain this whole idea on a biochemical basis, and that is when you have the precursors of coloration, you have to have a capital W and a capital D. Wherever capital W is there, then the situation has to be white flowers, because it will not allow the coloration to develop. When would the coloration be red? When there is only capital D, as you can see on your screens, and there is no capital W. And when would it be light red or pinkish? When the situation is, which is just 1 by 16, where the precursor can be treated with just small d and small w. That means there is no capital W and there is no capital D. So this is how we talk of a dominant epistasis. Let's now go over to another even more interesting situation, which is of a duplicate recessive epistasis. We also like to call it as complementary gene interaction. We begin with a paradox as to why are we calling it by two different names. On one hand, we are calling it as complementary genes, because we want to prove that the two dominant alleles somewhere or the other are going to complement each other. And on the other hand, we want to explain it on the basis of recessive epistasis, and that too also duplicate. We wish to prove therein that when the alleles are recessive, they are not going to allow the other phenotype to prevail. So that means we can explain this on the basis of either of the two approaches. Basically, it means that they are non-allelic genes and they are going to act together. And when they are going to act together, they are going to produce a phenotype which is different from that produced by either of them alone. So that means if one talks about the alleles of A and B, for example, we would find that capital B alone, capital A alone would have the same phenotype as would be the condition when these A and B were both recessive. So that means this becomes one phenotypic class. I repeat, capital B separately, capital A separately, and no matter that means the in both the cases the B and the A respectively would be recessive, and double recessive situations they would produce just phenotype, just one. And when both the dominant alleles are together, they will somehow complement each other and they will produce a different phenotype. So that means now we are restricted to just two phenotypic classes. Can you imagine, viewers? We have come from 4 phenotypic classes, 3 phenotypic classes, and now just 2. So taking a classical example of the identical phenotypes are produced, in this case the ratio in the F2 would become 9:7. instead of the expected ratio of 9:3:3:1. So, the classical example that we see on your screens is that of the sweet pea, which is Lathyrus odoratus, and this experiment was performed by the famous duo of Bateson and Punnett, and they found out the emergence of purple flowers. The purple flowers would come only when the two dominant genes, capital C and capital P, acted together. When either of them was alone, then we would find that the flowers were white, and of course in a homozygous condition of recessive they would again be white. So that means there was something of an interaction between capital C and capital P that could complement each other, and this is what they called as the emergence of a novel phenotype and called them as complementary genes. That means they are working in tandem. These genes are working in tandem, that is together, to produce a single gene product. So this is called as complementary gene interaction. I have not forgotten to tell you how to justify that it is a duplicate recessive epistasis that we would do when we are looking at the checkerboards. So these are the two types of flowers that you can see on your screens, the purple ones and the white ones. Let us take the famous Punnett square, where we find that the parents having capital C, now here capital C and P are not together. So, and in the other case P is alone, the dominant one. So it becomes white flowers. The moment they are crossed and we have a double heterozygous genotype, the plant becomes purple flowered. And now the F2 generation gives a characteristic 9:7 relationship. If we delve a little more closely into the whole situation, we have very simply said that capital C and capital P are complementing each other, and this is a case of complementary genes. But if you look very carefully among the 7 ones, that is the white ones, they have at least one recessive combination. Either it is small c, or it is small p, or both of them together. If we wish to classify this on the basis of duplicate recessive epistasis, how can we interpret it? We would say that the presence of homozygous recessive condition either of C or P, because both of them are non-allelic, they will not allow or they will suppress the formation of anthocyanins, and this is also therefore a case of duplicate recessive epistasis. Explaining it once again, we would see that purple would come only when capital C and P is there, and rest of them would all be white. Explaining them biochemically once again, you require a capital C and a capital P in all the circumstances, then only the purple pigment is going to be produced or the anthocyanin is going to be produced. If any one of them is absent, then the flower remains white. Talking on a different plane, we would say that whether it is small c or small p or together, that is the double homozygous recessive situation, the pigment anthocyanin cannot be formed. There are various other examples of recessive epistasis also that we have tried to display on your screens, which is of the Zea-mays. Here also we see a characteristic 9:7 aspect. So there are many more examples, for example in clover that we can also study, wherein we find that in trifolium we have cyanide production, and this cyanide production can also be explained on the basis of checkerboard, because here capital A and capital B, if they are together, they will produce more cyanide, and if it is only small a and small v, then there will be low cyanide. So, there can be many examples of dominant epistasis even in the case of dumb and mute in case of human beings. Sufficient is to say therefore that dominant epistasis at every step is also different from recessive epistasis. In our next lecture, we would like to highlight on the interactions further. Thank you.